Welcome to The Real News. I'm Jessel Noor in Baltimore. In news from Iraq, anti-government protests have swelled into the biggest mass demonstrations the country has seen since the 2003 fall of Saddam Hussein. On Thursday, President Barham Salih agreed to new voting laws and to hold new elections. Here's a clip.
I, as President of the Republic, will agree to holding new elections under a new electoral law and a new election commission. And the legitimacy of rule doesn't come only through people.
This month, hundreds have been killed in protests against the government, which they blame for widespread economic hardship in the country. 2 people were killed on Wednesday when Iraqi security forces shot tear gas canisters directly into their heads in an attempt to stop protesters entering Baghdad's heavily fortified green zone. Prime Minister Adel Abdul Mahdi will reportedly step down in the upcoming days, but demonstrators said removing him would not be enough. Here's a clip.
We want total change of government. We don't want the firing of 1 or 2 officials and replacing them with another corrupt one. We want the government to be uprooted totally. They think that we will protest for 1 or 2 days and then go home. No, we are staying here until the government is totally uprooted.
Now joining us to discuss all of this and what this means for the region as well is Professor Saba Al-Nasri at York University. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks. Just good to be with you.
So let's discuss this latest and breaking news. Iraq's prime minister will reportedly step down in the upcoming days, and the government has agreed to one of the key demands of the protest, which is the whole structure of this government and how it's set up and how it's undemocratic at its core. Can you talk about this news and some of these core demands of the protesters? We heard it's not about an individual, they want this whole system changed.
Right. Just, a footnote. In a few months from now, Iraq will celebrate the 100th anniversary of the 1920 revolution in Iraq against the British Empire. The last 16 years showed first that the Iraqi people resisted the US empire just like they did with the British Empire in 1920. And just like in 1920, the British Empire brought to power a corrupt and a decadent political/economic class that led to the revolution in 1958. So to today, the US empire, and especially the new cons, brought the most decadent and the most corrupt political parties to power in the classical and modern history of Iraq. So no wonder that the Iraqi people actually resisted ever since 2003. And even when these political parties, the Shiite, especially the Shiite political party, claiming to represent the nominally majority of the Iraqi people, actually, not only the so-called Sunni and Kurds protested against this government, but especially people in the south, in the southern provinces of Iraq, the so-called Shiite majority, they always protested against this government, and we had protests in 2018, 2015, I can go on and on, for the same reasons: lack of services, corruption, violence, suppression of free speech and movement, etc., etc. And nothing happened, nothing changed, until people realized, only through what we can call now the October Revolution in 2019, only through a revolutionary act, they can really, help introduce radical change in Iraq by appealing to parties and politicians and the religious institution to introduce reform. It never worked. So for many of us, it is no surprise. And I remember in 2007, I argued on the Real News. At that time, when they were talking about sectarian war, I was saying there is no sectarian war. There's a class war. And we can see today, those who are in power since 2003 are exposed as what they are, namely terrorists. They use all state terror against their own population. I mean own in the sense of claiming to represent the Shiite population. So they use all possible means of violence against the protesters. And the statistic from October 2001 until today, where the official numbers of the killed young people and injured ranged about 250 to 400 killed and up to 9,000 to 10,000 injured. This is maybe half of the truth, because all the, even hospitals and so on were instructed not to give the real number of the injured and the murdered. And once people go to the hospital, security forces come there and arrest them. So what the numbers we know are, I would assume maybe half or even less than half than the real number of the killed and the injured in Iraq.
Now, we know the protests are ongoing, and there's been an agreement to hold new elections, and the prime minister will step down. Do you think that the protesters are going to relent in their mass demonstrations? Dozens were killed this week alone. Or do you think they're going to keep going? I was looking at the comments of the president, and he basically argued we need to maintain this rule of law. We can't let there, we have to have some sort of semblance of process here. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the president is wrong. There is no rule of law in Iraq. There is the rule of might, and especially military might and the militias. And the second thing is, it seems to me that this political class is deaf on both ears. They are not listening to what people are actually, what people want. People, they said it again and again since October 1st, not only they regard this government of Adel Abdel Mahdi as corrupt, but the whole political regime. They want a radical change of the whole political regime in Iraq, not just the minister president. And again, when Barham Saleh says there will be new election and that Adel Abdel Mahdi will resign, there are two problems here. First, Adel Abdel Mahdi said he will resign if the parliament find an alternative, prime minister and a government. So that means we don't know if the parliament will find an alternative and how long this will take. And second, what Barham Saleh says about the new election, you can't have a new election under the current regime, with the current corrupt institution and the current corrupt political forces, because it will be the same people, the same politicians, the same blocks and lists that govern Iraq since 2003. He starts wrong. He's not listening to what people actually want. And I believe that things will get worse because people realize that they try to appease the protesters, just like they did in the last years, and not really listening that a radical shift in the way, in their attitude, and the way they deal with the demands, and the way they take, the people seriously. And that's why I think this will not work. Until today, since almost 1 month, since the protest started on October 1st, none of these political parties or politicians went to the street and sat with the people and talked to them face to face and listen carefully to what people want. So they still talk, pass by the reality of the protesters in Iran.
Now, I wanted to bring this into a regional context because we know Iran has been closely allied with the current leadership in not only Iraq, but Lebanon. Hezbollah is a close ally there. And for Iran, facing these sanctions, being marginalized and sort of a convenient enemy for the U.S. and its allies, Israel, for example, it's sort of made bedfellows with these authoritarian groups in these countries. We know that one of the Iranian military leaders actually came to the Green Zone and held a meeting, it was reported, with the security forces there. Could this really hurt Iran's standing in the region? And we know that, for example, the Shia majority in Iraq is really important to Iran as another Shia majority country. It's a religious camaraderie there. So talk about the significance here. And we've already seen, you said Iraq's October Revolution is not a sectarian war, it's a class war. And that's really clear in Lebanon and what's been happening there as well.
I mean, the supreme leader of Iran, Khamenei, he was just saying yesterday that what happens in Lebanon and Iraq are riots and instigated by Israel and the United States. I mean, that's this discourse, this conspiracy discourse. You can hear it in Iraq by the Shiite political party. They argue the same thing. So they still don't actually get it. I mean, Iran, unfortunately, as a neighbor and close ally of Iraq, they messed up actually in Iraq and Iran. Instead of, pushing for a reconciliation between different groups in Iraq and in Lebanon, and pushing especially their Shiite political parties, their allies, to actually introduce reform to include, not to exclude and marginalize, and to, fight corruption, etc. If Iran would have done that, no one in Iraq would say today, Iran barra barra means Iran get out. The problem is, I think Iran faces a major crisis internally, not least due to the sanction, not only economic crisis, but also a crisis of legitimacy. So the only way for Iran was to externalize its crisis to Iraq and Lebanon and Syria. And this way, Iran thought that through Iraq and Lebanon and Syria, they have a strategic depth, a space of maneuver, and then they can carry their conflict with the U.S. in this strategic depth. So this way they intensified the problem of the conflict within these countries, so much that people fed up not only with their own government, but with the intervention of Iran in the region. Because I argued long ago that in order to deal with the major organic crisis in Iran create a new crisis in the region and different countries. And through this crisis, the Iranian regime try to hold on to power. Because as long as there are chaos and violence and conflict and war in the region, the Iranian regime can tell the Iranian people, we have to stand together, we have to face these external threats, etc. And the same thing, the Iraqi government, especially the Shiite political parties, since long, by instigating sectarian war, by actually enabling Daesh, ISIS, to occupy the western and northwestern provinces in Iraq, and the al-Maliki, who at that time withdrew the Iraqi army and deliver the fate of the people there to Daesh. By creating all these wars and conflicts, they can hold on to power. Now the Iraqi people, especially in the southern provinces, the nominally Shiite population of Iraq, who are, of course, not only Shiite, they could be liberal, nationalists, lefties, even fascists, but they reduce them to this, ridiculous moment of Shiism. But especially these people realize that these Shiite political party, using religion, using sect, using the religious institution in Najaf and Karbala, using Daesh or ISIS, and all this as an excuse to sustain and reproduce corruption and accumulation of wealth and plundering of the people's wealth. So they fed up with it. And I think this is a huge transformation in their political consciousness.
Professor Saba Al-Nasri at York University, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Giselle.
Thank you for joining us at the Real News Network.
Hey y'all, my name is Tharna Noor and I'm a climate crisis reporter here at the Real News Network. This is a crucial moment for humanity and for the planet. So if you like what we do, please support us by subscribing at the link below. Thank you.